Shroud and TenZ, arguably two of the biggest names in esports, just went head-to-head in Fragpunk last week in Twitch Rivals, battling alongside 16 other pro streamers from a variety of backgrounds to earn their share of the $100,000 prize pool. TenZ, who took Valorant by storm relatively recently in 2020, and Shroud, the Counter-Strike legend turned Twitch streamer icon,
I think you're buttering me up.
both brought their all to the table for Fragpunk. But Fragpunk isn't like most tac shooters. In a game built on the unapologetic RNG of its shard card system, the viability of all the different weapons and lancers, and so many more nuances to its gameplay loop, success in this game demands a very specific skill set. Unlike other crossover successes like CS players thriving in Valorant or Overwatch pros finding their footing in Marvel Rivals, there isn't a singular analog that makes any one type of player instantly dominant in Fragpunk. What Twitch Rivals has shown us is that pro players crossing over from all shooter titles like Apex, Overwatch, Counter-Strike, and Valorant all bring certain skill expressions to the table. And in this video, I'm going to go over why TenZ outperformed Shroud, what I think people misunderstand about Fragpunk, and why I think this event has shown us that the future of Fragpunk is very bright. If you're new here, my name is Artie, and I've been a full-time esports coach and caster for over 2 years, and if you like esports and gaming content like this, it would mean the world to me if you subscribed. So, why do I think that the Fragpunk Twitch Rivals event was so important in highlighting all of this? Well, Fragpunk is still fresh, and people are still learning the ins and outs of the game. Even in Diamond lobbies 3 weeks after release, I'm meeting people that still don't know what some of the cards do. And while we can have an entire conversation about how the brain rot attention span of the 2020s might have done a little too much damage to the point where even I sometimes forget what cards are active before the end of the round, I think that most of the charm of Fragpunk comes from the fact that there is so much going on all at once. And because of this, pro players from different games are all predisposed to being better at certain skill expressions seen in Fragpunk. For the first time in a while, we have a game where there isn't a singular analog that would obviously make one pro player from one particular game instantly better than everyone else. Fragpunk takes a unique approach to every aspect of the game, drawing clear inspirations at times, but blurrier parallels at others. Let's start with one of the most obvious ones, CS and Valorant. When it comes to tac shooters, I'm uniquely qualified to talk on this since I was a salaried Valorant coach for over 2 years. In this category, there's 3 key focuses: low TTK, utility, and overall map control. Skills that are developed to play into relatively low TTK are things like crosshair placement, flick aim, and holding versus peeking angles. When it comes to utility, you've got things like timing of the util, layering of the util, and executing or stalling, especially when it comes to using that utility. And for map control, you have understanding of a default and pressuring. And while Fragpunk does have a lot of movement variation and a lot of unique abilities combined with shard card randomness and TTK inconsistency that doesn't necessarily favor tac shooter fundamentals, the Valorant and CS players' built-in knowledge of things like crosshair placement, discipline, and utility usage helps them to overcome a lot of these things and just use those basic skills in order to get an edge. But what about hero shooters? Let's go to that side of the spectrum and look at things like Overwatch and Marvel Rivals. Here, the key focuses are a little different, and I'm going to focus on 2 of them: mid-fight decision-making and cooldown management. On cooldown management, more so than Valorant, in Overwatch and Marvel Rivals, you're using abilities 2 or 3 times in a single fight. Whereas in Valorant, you aren't thinking about your util in terms of a singular fight. The majority of the time, you're thinking about the overall round itself. But Fragpunk's pacing is a little bit different in that sense, and hero shooter cooldown timing is a bit closer to Fragpunk's overall. When it comes to mid-fight decision-making, in hero shooters, due to the higher TTK, there's more movement and team-based decision-making at any given fight, very similar to Fragpunk. A lot of this is due to Fragpunk's lower cooldown timing and medium TTK time, which circles back to that first point, but you get the picture. There's a lot of skill that transfers from hero shooters. And the third analog that we're coming from is high TTK shooters, whether it's battle royale titles like Apex and Warzone, or arcade shooters like Halo and Splitgate. Games that have a higher TTK reward 2 very specific things: movement and tracking. I'm sure I don't have to explain much about the movement part. Fragpunk has way more movement than most tac shooters, with different shard cards adding super jumps, double jumps, hovering, sliding, speed boosting, and more. And someone who has a ton of time in these games comes preloaded with the ability to slide around a corner with Axon and hit a clip versus somebody coming from Counter-Strike. But when it comes to tracking, this is just the other half of that movement part. Like I mentioned earlier, tac shooters mainly focus on flick aim, precision flicking, holding an angle, memorizing spray patterns, etc. But in a game like Warzone or Apex, where your target can be moving a million miles an hour, you have to be able to keep your crosshair on target for a much longer period of time. Given the lack of one-tap headshots on the Discipline and Fever, I think that it's easy to see why someone with a heavy background in Apex could take down that same rushing Axon much easier than someone from a different game. All that just to say, high TTK shooters encourage movement, creativity, and reward aggressive plays. All different kinds of fast-paced decision-making that is fast in a different way to Valorant or CS. So now let's talk about Twitch Rivals itself and why TenZ beat Shroud 2 days in a row. While of course Shroud has the mechanical aim and much deeper understanding of discipline and timing than any of us Gen Z could ever hope for, what he lacks is in the movement department.
God damn it, this guy. He goes for blood. He goes for blood. Oh, I got a bone to pick with this guy.
Not only that, but when it comes to raw ability usage, we can see that TenZ just naturally adapted faster to being able to understand the full kit of the Lancers much faster than Shroud. Also, remember the fact that Fragpunk's biggest factor is the unapologetic RNG of the Shard card system, and the vast majority of players on Team TenZ both days in a row had fantastic adaptability to the randomness, with most of the players on Team TenZ thriving in the rapid decision making above other raw mechanical discipline. And beside all of that, the fact that someone who can remember what cards are active at any given time will always have an advantage over someone who forgets. But this is really something that you can only develop with time here in Fragpunk. Stripping away everything else and just looking at the duels, it's clear that after some more time with the game, Shroud was able to adapt and overcome at least a little bit better compared to day one. But the overarching results of TenZ across both days shows that it's clear that Fragpunk's skill floor is a lot higher than it might seem at first, due to the unique mechanics that Fragpunk brings to the table, blending everything from all three genres I just talked about. Okay, cool, so streamer A is better than streamer B. Why is any of this important? What does Twitch Rivals have to do with anything? Well, for one, the format of Twitch Rivals shows us a pretty well-rounded picture of what skilled players' adoption of the game looks like, and what challenges players from across different skill sets face when first trying it out. Watching Twitch Rivals back, looking at what the Destiny and Tarkov players picked up and were really good at first was vastly different from what Valorant players were good at. And what Valorant players were good at looked a lot different to the approach taken by the Counter-Strike players. There's a ton of nuance to look for in these games, but it sets a precedent. I think that the Twitch Rivals event shows us that Fragpunk has a ton of esports potential, especially given how deep many of these systems run. The interplay between the shard cards and the map design, the movement, the lancers, the gunplay, everything has so much depth that there really is a super high skill ceiling to the game in addition to its high skill floor. So many people are quick to look at Fragpunk and say Valorant clone or Valorant and Apex had a baby, but it's such a unique title that really allows you to get more and more in depth as time goes on. Ironically, the only other FPS that has been this unique in the past few years is the finals. And while of course these two games could not be more different, they both took a look at abilities, gunplay, and movement and made variations to the two in unique ways that sets them apart from every other game that's currently on the market. I don't think that any specific gaming background will dominate the long term. I think there's areas where tac shooter players will obviously adapt faster, but right now there's a lot of people in Punkmaster that don't have any tac shooter experience at all, who instead took the advantages that they had from their previous titles and found ways to make that work for them in Fragpunk. A mix of tac shooter fundamentals, hero shooter adaptability, and high TTK shooter movement. But that's just my thoughts on it from the perspective of the guy that was casting the event. The game rewards adaptability, and that's why it's exciting to watch and play. And while I think that Fragpunk is a melting pot of skills, what's your take? Do you think that Fragpunk favors one single type of FPS background more so than others? Let me know in the comments. And if you watch this all the way to the end, be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, because I've got tons of more Fragpunk content on the way and a lot of other new stuff in the works. That's all for now. Thank you so much for watching, and don't worry, you'll see me around.